Hi, my name is Alex LeMan. Welcome to Shadow Whispers, where love speaks softer than a whisper but echoes through the heart. This is a place for those who don't just crave romance, but want to feel every breath between the lines. Here, love isn't always gentle, but it's always real. Some stories end in forever, some never should have begun, but each one leaves a mark. So, settle into the quiet, open your heart, and let the story begin. When Love Returns in Bloom. Chapter 1. The Stranger at Windmere House. "You're not Charles," Eleanor said, her voice calm but cold as the November wind curling through the open doorway. The man, standing on the porch, didn't flinch. Rain streaked the brim of his hat, and a trail of wet boot prints followed behind him like ghosts. He held a folded letter in one gloved hand. "No," he replied. "I'm Thomas Whitaker. I was sent for the steward's position." Eleanor studied him. Tall, soaked. Late? Her husband had been dead for over a year, yet this was the first time she'd heard of any steward being hired. The letter, signed with her late husband's careful hand, bore the date. April 15th, 1902. "You're late by about 16 months, she said, "and dead men don't send letters." The man didn't smile. Instead, he looked past her, into the shadows of the hall behind. For a moment, Eleanor thought he might walk away. But then he removed his hat, revealing dark, rain-matted hair and eyes the exact color of weathered copper. "I'd like to speak to whoever's in charge now," he said quietly. She stepped aside without answering, her mind already circling the mystery. Something about his voice. It rang like a memory she couldn't place. Windmere House sat high on a ridge above Merrow Creek, Virginia, surrounded by apple orchards and fog-drenched pines. The house itself groaned with age, every stair protesting, every window breathing in drafts. It had been her husband's obsession. It was now her burden. Eleanor led Thomas to the parlor. The fire was long dead, but the room held a kind of lingering warmth from the past. Walnut shelves, heavy drapes, the scent of cedar and dried lavender. Thomas didn't sit. He walked to the mantel and paused, eyes locked on a small daguerreotype in a silver frame. A young woman in profile. Dark hair, a familiar solemn grace. "That's not you," he said. "No," Eleanor replied. "It's my sister." He didn't ask more. That unsettled her most of all. "You said my husband sent that letter," she pressed. "But you must know he died last spring." "I know," Thomas said. "I read it in the paper. I came anyway." The air shifted. A weight passed between them, unspoken but sharp. She watched as he unfolded the letter again, hands steady. Her late husband's handwriting, undeniable. The paper was weathered but not old. She recognized the parchment, the ink, the odd flourish in the sea of Charles. It was real and impossible. The silence stretched. "I was promised a place to sleep and work to earn my keep," he said. "And if I refuse, then I'll sleep in the orchard." Eleanor narrowed her eyes. Men don't usually come back to Merrow Creek without a reason. Thomas met her gaze. "I had unfinished business." The words hung like thunder. Something tightened in Eleanor's chest, a thread pulled taut. She should have sent him away. Instead, she nodded toward the old guest wing. "Second door on the right. The firewood's damp, but the walls still stand." He bowed his head slightly, the barest trace of gratitude, and left without another word. Eleanor stood alone in the parlor for a long moment, then turned sharply to the cabinet in the corner. She pulled open the drawer where Charles kept old contracts, sealed letters, drafts, all there, undisturbed. No sign of any letter to Thomas Whitaker. Outside, the rain turned to sleet, whispering against the glass like forgotten names. That night, Eleanor dreamed of the orchard again. She hadn't stepped foot there since Mary disappeared, but in her dream it was spring. Blossoms fell in slow motion. A man stood beneath the crooked tree, Thomas. Only his eyes were different, younger, desperate, and beside him Mary smiled. Eleanor awoke with a gasp. She wrapped herself in a shawl and stepped to the balcony. Below, in the moonlight, the orchard shimmered silver. And there he was, Thomas, walking among the trees, pausing at the same place her sister was last seen, as if he knew exactly where to stop. The next morning, Eleanor asked her housekeeper, Ruth, what she thought of the new steward. Ruth, a woman unshaken by death or rumor, only crossed herself. He has the look of someone who's seen what he shouldn't have. That evening, Thomas joined Eleanor for supper. The meal was quiet, civil. She asked him questions about his past. He answered little. But when she asked about his family, his hand paused over the spoon. "No one left," he said. "Not anymore." Later, she watched him from the hallway as he lit a lantern in the guest room. He moved carefully, reverently, as if afraid of waking something. In her study, Eleanor opened her sister's journal for the first time in years. The last entry was dated May 11th, 1883, the day before Mary vanished. It read, "He says we will leave tomorrow. He promises this time he won't run." Eleanor stared at the page. The ink was faded, but the initials at the bottom were still clear. T.W. Outside, the wind howled through the apple trees, and for the first time in 2 decades, the house no longer felt entirely hers. Chapter 2. The Portrait in the Attic. Eleanor heard the creak just after midnight. It came from above, soft, deliberate. Not the random groan of old wood or settling beams. Someone was moving in the attic. She rose without lighting a lamp. The corridors of Windmere House were wide, lined with wainscoting and narrow windows that caught the moonlight in slivers. Her bare feet pressed silently against the floorboards as she climbed the narrow staircase at the end of the west wing. The air grew colder with each step, as if the attic breathed its own season. When she opened the attic door, she saw him. Thomas stood near the far wall, lantern in hand, the flickering light casting long shadows across crates, trunks, and dust-veiled cloths. He didn't turn when she entered. His attention was fixed on something tall and rectangular leaning against the wall. A portrait. Eleanor stepped forward slowly, her voice low. That room was locked. He glanced back at her. The lock was broken. It wasn't. Thomas said nothing. He returned his gaze to the portrait and tilted the lantern higher. The canvas was yellowed with age, but the image remained clear. Mary, 19. In her favorite velvet dress, her hair twisted up, eyes full of something wild and unknowable. Eleanor swallowed hard. That was painted the year before she disappeared. Thomas nodded once. His face was unreadable, but his voice carried a heaviness that clung to the air. "She was beautiful," he said. "You never met her." He didn't answer. The silence between them pulsed like a heartbeat. Eleanor stepped closer, arms wrapped tightly around her waist. The attic smelled of mothballs, old wood, and distant summer storms. She couldn't remember the last time someone spoke of Mary without caution or pity. "Why are you up here?" she asked. "I felt something," he said, "like a pull. I didn't know what it was until I saw her face." Eleanor stared at him. "You knew her, didn't you?" He turned fully now, eyes catching hers in the dim light. "I thought I did, a long time ago, but everything I thought I knew disappeared with her." A floorboard popped beneath her as she shifted. Her voice trembled. "You were the boy." Thomas lowered his gaze. "She called me Ghost once, said I'd vanish before the end of summer. She was right." Eleanor moved to the portrait. Her fingers brushed the edge of the canvas. Dust clung to her skin. "She said she was leaving," she whispered. "She told me she had a reason. I never knew that reason had a name." Thomas stepped closer. "She told me to wait beneath the orchard tree. She never came." "Maybe she did," Eleanor said, "just not the way you expected." The attic creaked as the wind howled outside. The shutters rattled like bones. For a moment, the storm sounded like a voice, like someone calling through the orchard. Thomas touched the frame gently, almost reverently. "I came back because something in me never left. I thought if I could find the place where she was last seen, I might understand why it all fell apart." "And if you do?" Eleanor asked. "Then maybe I can finally forgive myself." She wanted to ask more. She wanted to scream at him for leaving, for being the reason Mary had vanished without a trace. But instead, she said, "The painting used to hang downstairs, before my husband had it taken down. He hated how much it reminded me of her." Thomas looked at her, a flicker of something softer in his eyes. "And do you still miss her?" "Every time it rains." They stood in silence until the lantern sputtered. Then Eleanor turned and left the attic without another word. But sleep didn't come. At dawn, Eleanor walked to the orchard. The morning fog clung low to the ground, coiling around the trees like silk. The grass was wet beneath her boots, and the air smelled of cold apples and memory. She stopped at the crooked tree near the back fence. It leaned slightly east, just like Mary used to. Beneath it, the earth had been disturbed. A shallow scrape in the soil, as if someone had knelt there recently. A single boot print, fresh. She knelt and dug gently with her hands, half mad for doing it, knowing it made no sense. And yet, beneath a thin layer of earth, she found something small wrapped in linen. A silver hairpin, her mother's. The one Mary had borrowed the night she vanished. That evening, Eleanor didn't speak during supper. Thomas watched her with a quiet patience that infuriated her. When she finally spoke, her voice was sharper than she intended. "You buried it." He looked confused. "What?" "The hairpin." Thomas shook his head slowly. "I didn't. I found it. I left it there." She stared at him. "Why?" "To see if you'd come." Her heart stopped. Her breath caught. "You're playing with things you don't understand," she said. "Maybe, but I remember her better than anyone, and I think she left a trail." Eleanor stood, chair scraping against the floor. "I don't know what game you think this is, Mr. Whitaker, but if you're here to stir ghosts, don't forget, you may not be the only one haunted." She left him at the table. Outside, the wind picked up, and for a split second, Eleanor thought she saw someone move beyond the orchard fence. Not Thomas, and not a memory. Chapter 3. The Letter. He never sent. Lightning split the sky above Marrow Creek, and every window in Windmere House flashed white. A rumble followed, low and rolling, as if the ridge itself were speaking. The lamps sputtered once and died. Silence pressed in, broken only by the drumming rain and a distant crash of a branch against the roof. Eleanor steadied her breath in the sudden dark. Candles. She needed candles. She crossed the wide foyer, skirts brushing carved banisters, and entered the library, where the scent of damp paper mixed with old tobacco smoke. A small glow pulsed within. Thomas's lantern, left on a side table, bronze sides humming with heat. Beside it lay his weather-worn satchel, half open. She should have turned away. Instead, her fingers lifted the flap. Inside sat a tight bundle of envelopes tied with fraying blue ribbon. Her heart lurched. Each envelope bore a single initial in looping ink. Im. She slid one free. The seal cracked like dry leaves. The handwriting inside was Mary's, spry, confident, alive. Footsteps sounded in the hallway. Eleanor froze. Thomas appeared in the doorway, raincoat slung over one arm, hair plastered to his forehead. Stormlight framed him like a shadow, fresher than the night itself. His gaze dropped to the opened letter. "That isn't yours," he said, voice low but unsteady. "I could say the same." Eleanor held up the bundle. "Why were her letters hidden in your bag, Thomas?" He stepped forward. "Because I never sent them." Thunder growled overhead. Books shivered on their shelves. Eleanor's pulse hammered as she read aloud a line from the page. "I will not run this time. Meet me beneath the crooked tree at twilight." Her throat tightened. "She was writing to you. She was begging me to stay," he answered, hands clenching. "I meant to send my reply, but cowardice travels faster than any post. By the time courage came, she was already gone." Eleanor pressed the letter to her chest, feeling the paper tremble. "And you carried her words for 20 years? They were all I had left of her." His eyes glinted in the lantern light, fierce and fragile. "I thought if I returned them to this house, maybe her ghost would rest, and mine with it." A gust slammed the shutters. The lantern flickered, throwing wild gold across his face, across hers. Memories surged, Mary laughing in the orchard, Mary humming by the parlor window, Mary vanishing into rain exactly like this. Eleanor's anger cracked under the weight of shared grief. "You abandoned her," she whispered, tears stinging. "You left her to whatever fate found her in those woods." "I know." Thomas's voice splintered. "I have lived every day with that knowledge." Silence deepened, thick with thunder and regret. Eleanor turned away, but he caught her hand, warm despite the storm-cooled air. She should have pulled free. Instead, her fingers curled into his. "What do you want from me?" she asked. "Forgiveness," he said, "and the chance to give you the truth she never received." Eleanor's resolve fractured. The world narrowed to the scent of wet wool and orchard earth on his coat, the soft rasp of his breath. She tasted salt, her tears, or his, she couldn't tell, when he leaned closer. The kiss was hesitant, then desperate, as though both of them were afraid it might be their last. The lantern flared, then died, plunging them into darkness lit only by lightning beyond the windows. Eleanor pulled back first. "A kiss can't mend 20 years. "No," Thomas agreed. "But a new story might." She stepped away, binding the letters with shaking hands. Without a word, she walked to Charles's old desk, unlocked the bottom drawer, and placed the bundle inside. The key clicked sharp in the lock. "These stay with me until I decide their fate." Thomas nodded once, accepting a sentence he could not appeal. Rain battered the glass, louder now, urgent. Somewhere in the attic a door banged. Eleanor lifted a candle, struck a match, and handed both to him. "See to the windows. Windmere won't survive another winter if the storm tears her open." He took the candle. "And you?" "I'll guard the letters, and whatever truth is still hiding in this house." Their eyes met, storm and ember, guilt and hunger, before Thomas disappeared into the corridor, flame bobbing in his wake. Left alone, Eleanor pressed her palm to the locked drawer. Outside, the orchard burned white with lightning, and for an instant she imagined Mary standing beneath the crooked tree, holding an unopened letter against her heart, waiting for a promise that never arrived. Wind howled through the flue, carrying a single fragile scent, apple blossoms out of season. Eleanor whispered into the dark, not sure if Thomas could hear or if Mary would. "This time," she said, "no one runs." Chapter 4. The Garden in Winter. A week of iron-gray skies settled over Marrow Creek, turning the orchard into a maze of skeletal branches and frozen moss. Eleanor rose each dawn to the hush of snow and found Thomas already outside, coat dark against the whitened earth, digging where no garden had dared bloom since Mary vanished. She watched from her bedroom window, breath fogging the glass, unsure whether to feel anger or comfort at the sight of him turning soil that had slept for 2 decades. On the 8th morning, she left the house, crunching through frost toward him. The air carried the metallic bite of approaching ice. Thomas straightened when he heard her boots, wiping mud from his gloves. Between them lay a rough half-circle of freshly exposed beds, edges marked by stones Eleanor recognized from the old greenhouse path. "You should rest," she said. "The ground is dead this time of year." "Sleeping," he answered, looking past her to the line of pines. "Not dead." She knelt beside the newly cut border. Beneath the top layer, the soil was dark, almost warm. A memory surfaced, Mary laughing as she pressed daffodil bulbs into that same earth, promising spring even as frost clung to her sleeves. "What do you plan to grow here?" Eleanor asked. "Whatever she loved," he said. "Daffodils first, then the climbing roses." The certainty in his voice stung her. "You speak as if you never left." Thomas set his spade aside. "I left my courage, not my memories." Eleanor rose, snow tumbling from her skirt hem. "Your memories uprooted this house. Do you really think flowers can repair what's buried here?" "Maybe not," he said softly. "But something has to live where so much went silent." A raw wind swept the ridge, rattling empty branches. Eleanor turned toward the chapel ruins on the hill, its roof collapsed and walls strangled by ivy. Thomas followed her gaze and tensed. "You avoid that place," she said. "It was never meant to hold mercy," he replied. Eleanor's pulse quickened. "What happened there?" He answered with a question of his own. "Would the truth change anything between us?" She opened her mouth, closed it. The ground felt suddenly unsteady. "I don't know," Thomas sighed, breath pluming. "Then let the garden speak first." That night, snow returned, heavy and silent. Windmere's windows fogged, and corridors smelled of applewood smoke. Eleanor struggled through ledgers by lamplight, distracted by the steady crunch of Thomas's boots as he paced outside. Shortly after midnight, the sound ceased. She listened, heart racing, until the house fell still. Unable to rest, she lit a lantern and followed the hallway past the attic door, up 2 narrow steps to the eastern balcony that overlooked the orchard. Moonlight poured thin silver over the snow. Thomas stood at the crooked tree, head bowed, a lantern at his feet casting long golden arms across the drifts. He eased something from his pocket, a small pocket knife, and began to carve a mark into the trunk. Eleanor pressed a hand to the railing. Sap glistened like tears where the blade scored bark. When he finished, he stepped back and whispered words the wind carried away. Eleanor descended the back stairs, anger and curiosity sparring in her chest. Outside, the snow swallowed her footsteps until she reached the tree. Thomas turned, startled but not surprised. "You shouldn't wander alone," he said. "What have you done?" She lifted the lantern. Its glow revealed an M cut deep into the wood. "A promise," he replied. "One I failed to keep." Eleanor bit back a chill that wasn't the cold. "Are you haunting her, or is she haunting you?" "Both," he murmured. He brushed snow from her shoulder. His hand lingered, warm even through his glove. The closeness pulled memories to the surface. His kiss by the library fire, the letters locked away, the ache she tried to deny. She stepped back. "Come inside. We'll freeze." Thomas looked toward the chapel ruins. "Not yet. There's something you must see." He led her along a narrow path, lantern swinging. They stopped at a low mound half hidden by weeds and snow. A crude wooden cross protruded, its inscription weathered into blindness. "Who lies here?" she asked. "Your father's groundsman buried a stillborn lamb here the spring Mary disappeared," Thomas said. Mary believed that every lost thing deserved a name. She planted crocuses to mark it. They never grew. Eleanor knelt, brushed snow aside, and found frost-stiffened shoots, green, fragile points pushing through the ice. "They were never dead," Thomas said, "just waiting." Something inside Eleanor loosened. A knot pulled for 20 years. Tears slipped before she could hide them. Thomas crouched beside her, gloved fingers brushing hers. "I can't change that night," he whispered, "but I can give life where she wished it." She met his gaze, storms reflected in softer eyes. "Will you stay long enough to see them bloom?" "If you let me." A distant church bell, warped by wind, tolled the late hour. Snowflakes spiraled around them, bright against the dark orchard. Eleanor took his hand, stood, and together they walked back toward Windmere House, leaving 2 sets of footprints that the falling snow tried and failed to erase. Chapter 5. The Truth. Beneath the orchard, snow melted fast under a pale February sun, turning Windmere's orchard into a quilt of white islands and slick black soil. Eleanor stood on the veranda when Deputy Earl Monroe rode up the lane. He dismounted, handed her a sealed envelope, and muttered that it had been nailed to the church door with no signature. She broke the wax, heart thudding. The message was sharp as a blade. Your new steward was the last man seen with Mary Mason. Ask him why the crooked tree bleeds each spring. Ask him who paid the groundsman to dig. Eleanor's fingers trembled. She glanced toward the garden, where Thomas worked beside newly thawed beds, sleeves rolled, hair bright in cold sun. She marched down the slope, letter crushed in her palm. "Who nailed this?" she demanded, tossing the paper at his boots. Thomas read in a single glance, color draining. "I wondered how long the town would stay quiet. Is it true?" Her voice cracked. "Yes," he said, barely breathing, "but the truth is worse than rumor, and I won't drag you into it unless you choose to hear." "Then choose for me," she snapped. He wiped soil from his hands and led her along an overgrown path past the crooked tree, down to the northern fence where pines grew thick and wild. Sunlight filtered green through needles. Snow melted in soft ticks from branches. At the base of a leaning pine, a rectangle of earth sagged slightly, as if it had settled over something hollow. Thomas knelt, pulled away dead needles, and uncovered a rusted tin box no larger than a Bible. He handed it to Eleanor. Her breath fogged as she opened the lid. Inside lay a silver locket caked with dried brown, a scrap of ribbon, and a folded note. Mary's handwriting, water-blurred but legible. "If Father finds us together, run." He promised he would rather see me buried beneath his own land than shamed. Eleanor's knees gave out. She sat hard on the cold ground. "Father? He died calling you a thief, swearing you stole her away." Thomas steadied her. "He caught us planning to leave for Norfolk. Mary tried to explain. He struck her. She fell, hit the stone root by that tree." His voice shook. "I saw blood in the snow. I panicked, fled for help. When I returned, she was gone, and your father said if I valued my life, I would disappear too. I believed him." Cowardice again. Eleanor pressed the locket to her chest. "Why come back?" "Because lies rot the soil. I thought if I planted what she loved, maybe the ground would loosen its grip on the truth." Footsteps crunched behind them. Deputy Monroe stood at the fence, hat in hand, rifle slung but idle. "I heard enough," he said. "Town council's meeting tonight. Folks want answers." Thomas rose. They'll have them. But Mary deserves better than gossip. He and Monroe lifted the sagging earth with shovels fetched from the shed. As Eleanor watched, they unearthed a warped coffin lid, edges chewed by roots. The deputy pried it up. Inside lay nothing but tattered linen and a scattering of bones too small to be human. A lamb, long decayed. "Father hid her elsewhere," Eleanor whispered, tears freezing on her lashes, "and he used this as a warning." Thomas touched the empty coffin, grief and rage mingling. "Let the town see this. Let them know the monster is already in his grave." That evening, lanterns dotted the main hall of Windmere as neighbors gathered, faces lined with suspicion. Thomas stood before them, Eleanor at his side, the tin box open on a table. He spoke of love, of fear, of a night lost to violence. He showed the note, the locket, the empty coffin. Whispers rose and fell like wind through wheat. Old Mrs. Harper, who had sewn Mary's dresses, wept aloud. Ruth, the housekeeper, folded her arms and declared she always knew the girl never ran away for shame. The deputy confirmed the handwriting matched Mary's diaries. Murmurs shifted from accusation to sorrow, then to a brittle, searching quiet. When voices faded, Eleanor stepped forward. "My sister was not a ghost to frighten children. She was a woman who loved and trusted and paid for it with her life. Windmere has lived under a lie. Tonight that ends." She turned to Thomas, eyes wet but fierce. "Stay. Help me give her a garden and a grave that bears her name." Thomas's reply was a whisper, but the hall carried it. "I will stay until the last crocus blooms." Outside, February wind swept the ridge. In the orchard, beneath a sky rinsed clean of snow, the first green spears of spring pushed through the thawed soil, stubborn, bright, and unafraid. Chapter 6. When spring finally came, dawn broke in coral bands across Marrow Creek, and Windmere's orchard answered with color of its own. Hundreds of crocuses thrust through thawed earth, violet and gold flames licking at the cold. Eleanor knelt among them, pressing Mary's silver locket beneath a young rosebush. The metal caught one flash of sunrise before the soil accepted it, a promise sealed. Behind her, Thomas's boots crunched over wet leaves. "The chapel wall gave way in the night," he said, breath quick. "There's something inside you need to see." She followed him up the ridge, where ivy-strangled stones leaned against each other like exhausted soldiers. A winter storm had split the rear chapel wall, exposing a hollow chamber no wider than a man's shoulders. Lantern light trembled over dusty boards, and a small cedar trunk bound with iron straps. Thomas forced the lid. Inside lay a stack of ledgers, a velvet ribbon, and a brittle sheet folded 3 times. Eleanor unfolded it carefully. Her father's handwriting unfurled across the page, an unsigned confession dated 2 weeks after Mary vanished. He wrote of anger, of a blow struck in madness, of a daughter carried bleeding into the chapel and locked away, until God forgives me. No body was mentioned, only the command that the record be hidden where no son-in-law might dig. Eleanor's vision blurred. Thomas steadied her as she whispered, "All these years, the truth was 3 walls away." They took the confession to Deputy Monroe, who read it twice, jaw tight. "The council meets at noon," he said. "This ends today." Word spread faster than spring fire in dry grass. By midday, the orchard overflowed. Townsfolk, field hands, women clutching hymnals, children curious despite their mothers' shushing palms. The crooked tree stood at the center, bark still bearing the scarred M. Beneath its branches, Deputy Monroe read the confession aloud. Gasps rippled, then silence heavy enough to bend the air. Old Mrs. Harper stepped forward first. She laid a sprig of rosemary at the tree's roots and murmured, "For a girl who loved wild things." Others followed, buttons, ribbons, handwritten prayers, until the ground glittered with memorial offerings. When the crowd thinned, Eleanor addressed those who lingered. Windmere was built on secrets. Today, we plant truth. She motioned to Thomas, who opened a canvas sack and drew out rose cuttings wrapped in damp burlap. Together they knelt, he setting each stem, she pressing soil, their hands moving in silent rhythm like a shared heartbeat. The sun lifted high, bees droned, snowmelt trickled through grass. Ruth, the housekeeper, emerged from the porch with pitchers of cider, and even those who had doubted accepted cups, as if thirst too was a form of forgiveness. Children chased one another among sprouting daffodils, their laughter drifting over weathered stones. Near twilight, Monroe returned, hat in hand. "Council cleared your name," he told Thomas. "You're free to stay or go as you see fit." Thomas's gaze slid to Eleanor. In fading light, her face carried both exhaustion and a fragile joy he had never seen before. He turned back to the deputy. "I see fit to remain." Night crept in, cool and fragrant. Lanterns flickered along the veranda where neighbors shared quiet farewells, their shadows moving like slow water. At last, only Eleanor and Thomas remained among the blooms. Frogs sang from the pond. The moon rose thin and bright. Eleanor brushed soil from her palms. "Spring took its time," she said. "It waited for the ground to be ready," he answered. She faced him fully then, orchard perfume curling between them. "Are we ready?" Thomas traced a dirt-smudged curl from her cheek. "I buried one life here and found another, if you'll have it." Eleanor's reply was a soft laugh that caught on a sob. She rose on tiptoe and kissed him, the taste of apple blossoms and salt. Around them, the night filled with the hush of petals unfolding, as if even the flowers strained to listen. When they parted, Thomas drew from his pocket a small brass key. "To the garden gate," he said. "It sticks in summer. We'll fix it together." Eleanor closed his fingers over the key and leaned against his shoulder. Windmere's windows glowed warm behind them, no longer a prison of ghosts, but a house waking to its own breath. In the orchard the roses waited, roots drinking moon-cooled soil. By morning they would open, pale and perfect, beneath a sky the color of forgiveness. And Windmere at last would smell of living things instead of secrets.